Have you ever walked into a place you built from the ground up, only to feel like a stranger? That night, Thomas Grayson, the founder of the upscale restaurant chain Grayson's Table, didn't show up in an expensive suit or with a powerful business card. He came in wearing a worn-out hoodie, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Outside, a light rain was falling. Inside, the restaurant was still glowing, warm and lively as always. Thomas sat alone in a quiet corner, ordered a glass of water, and pretended to study a menu he knew by heart. This wasn't his first time going undercover to listen in on the ground. But tonight, he wasn't looking for system flaws or evaluating staff performance. He was searching for something deeper, the soul of the place. Something he feared had been lost somewhere along the road to success. The clinking of silverware, the quiet giggles of a young couple across the room, and a soft whisper just behind him. "Do you think we'll see him today?" A child's voice, slightly trembling. "I don't know, but Mom said this is the place. He comes here a lot." Another voice, firmer, more certain. Thomas froze. He held his breath. Who were they talking about? Some celebrity, a relative, or him? "We won't get caught. We just need to find out who he is." But what if Mum's wrong? She's not wrong. She said it's all his fault. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be living like this. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. His heart started pounding. His hands clenched the menu until it crumpled in his grip. Who were they talking about? He tried to stay composed, still pretending to flip through the menu, but every sense in him was now tuned to the two boys behind him. One of them spoke again, his voice cracked but burning with anger. Mom said, "He ruined her life, took everything from her." In that moment, Thomas no longer felt cold from the rain outside. He felt cold because of those words, each one stabbing into him like a blade. Who was the woman those two boys were talking about? And why did that haunting feeling feel so painfully familiar? Thomas tried to keep a calm exterior, but inside, a storm of confusion and dread was raging. Those whispers, they weren't a joke, and they weren't some misunderstanding. They carried real pain, a scar from the past he had never dared to confront. He glanced subtly over his shoulder. The two boys sat close together in an old booth, their backs slightly hunched, faces half hidden beneath their caps. One had messy curls, the other had sharp, bright eyes filled with caution. They weren't playing games or scrolling through phones like other kids. Their eyes moved constantly, scanning the room, searching, guessing, waiting for someone. The waiter returned with his order, a plate of the famous truffle cream pasta, the signature dish of Grayson's Table, the one Thomas himself had personally signed off on. But now, his taste buds felt completely numb. Then he heard the curly-haired boy's voice again. "If he shows up, we have to be sure. Mum said he never runs away." Thomas's heart sank. Never runs away. Was that a hint or a challenge? He asked himself, what could I have done so wrong to be seen as the man who destroyed a woman's life? Thomas was a meticulous man, always careful in his work, sometimes rigid. But he had never intentionally hurt anyone, or at least, not in any way he remembered. And yet, the name Angela began to drift into his mind like an old, forgotten cloud of smoke. Angela, That name came with a stream of faded images, a passionate sous chef who once brought bold, daring flavors to the kitchen. But then she vanished. No goodbye, no email, no resignation letter. And he never went looking. Thomas felt his throat tighten. If those boys were Angela's children, and if what they were saying was true, then he hadn't just forgotten a former colleague. He had let her fall into the silence without turning back even once. A part of him wanted to stand up and leave the restaurant, to pretend he hadn't heard a thing, to act like nothing was happening. But no, it was too late to turn away, because when the truth calls your name, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. He set his fork down, pushed the untouched plate of food aside, and gently clenched his hands to steady himself. He wouldn't run. Not this time. Thomas took a deep breath, rose from his seat, and walked slowly toward the bar near the kitchen, just close enough to observe the boys' booth without drawing too much attention. He leaned against the counter, resting his hand on the cold marble surface, trying to calm the storm in his chest. A passing thought struck him. Was he afraid of two kids? No, he wasn't afraid of them. He was afraid of what they might represent, the truth that had never been spoken, the memories he had chosen to forget, the mistake he had never dared to name. He gently called over the waitress who had served him earlier. "Hey, the two boys at the corner table, do they come here often?" She glanced toward the booth, then shook her head. "Don't think so. First time I've seen them." "Why?" "No reason. They just seem a little lost." The waitress shrugged and walked away, clearly unbothered, but Thomas couldn't ignore it. He returned to his table and sat down again, but this time he didn't open the menu. He just looked at the two children and let his thoughts spin. If they're Angela's kids, what have they heard about me? And who am I in their mother's story? A few minutes later, he stood up once more. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't keep hiding. He walked over to the boys' table, trying to keep his voice soft like a concerned stranger, noticing two lost children. "Hey there, sorry to bother you, but you two look like you're waiting for someone. Is everything all right?" The boys jumped and turned around, their eyes wide. The curly-haired one, who he'd later learn was named Leo, instinctively leaned forward to shield his younger brother, as if bracing for an adult to scold them. The one in the cap, Max, glared at Thomas and whispered, "Who are you?" Thomas gave a gentle smile, slipping his hands into his pockets to seem less threatening. "Just someone who knows this place well. If you're looking for someone, maybe I can help." Leo stared at Thomas for a long moment. A flicker of confusion passed through his eyes, like he was trying to match this man's face with an image in his memory. Then Max squinted. "Wait, I know you. I've seen you somewhere before." Thomas swallowed hard. He didn't have a chance to respond before Leo whispered to his brother, "It's him." "No way," Max replied, but his eyes stayed locked on Thomas's face. Leo's breathing grew quicker. "Mum showed me a picture. That's him, Thomas Grayson." There was nowhere left to hide, no excuse to deny it, no way to look away from the fury burning in those two young faces. Thomas nodded, his voice gentle. "Yes, I'm Thomas Grayson, but I don't understand. Who is your mother?" Leo stared at him, his gaze sharp like fire. "Angela Warren." "And Mum said you ruined her life." That name, Angela Warren, swept through Thomas's memory like a cold wind. He froze, his mouth open, but no words came out. It took him several seconds to find his voice again. "Angela," he repeated slowly, like he was touching something fragile. "Your mother used to work here." Leo clenched his fists. "No, she didn't just work here. She lived for this place. She helped build the foundation for every dish you're now getting fame from." Thomas felt as if someone had slapped him across the face. He glanced at the cold plate of pasta on the nearby table, the truffle cream dish, once the pride of the restaurant. That recipe, was it Angela's? Had he ignored that truth, or had he chosen to forget it? Max chimed in, his voice quieter but no less heavy. "Mom said, you took her ideas, but the press only ever mentioned you, and when she pushed back, you made sure she couldn't get a job anywhere else." Thomas stepped back. "Wait, I would never." Leo cut him off. Eyes blazing. "Mom tried to get back into the industry for 2 years. Every time she applied, she got rejected. They said she was difficult to work with, or they just shook their heads. After that, she gave up, left the city, and since then, our lives have never been the same." A heavy silence settled around the three of them. Thomas tried to recall. Angela, the woman with fiery red curls and a firm, clear voice, used to stand in the south corner of the kitchen, always surrounded by dozens of spices and herbs. She once pitched a wild mushroom gnocchi dish with a flavor so bold, he had to taste it 7 times before finally agreeing to put it on the menu. And after that, the dish was praised in the press as a breakthrough creation from Grayson's table. And then she disappeared. No arguments, no scandal. Just one day she never came back. Thomas, at the time struggling to open a second location, didn't look for her, didn't ask questions. He simply thought, someone new can replace her. But now, all the pieces were clicking into place in the most painful way. Thomas spoke softly, as if admitting something he had spent his whole life avoiding. "I didn't know. If what you're saying is true, I want to talk to your mom. I want to hear it from her." Leo and Max exchanged a glance. Then Leo nodded, his voice slow and deliberate. "If you really want to know, then come meet our mom, but don't expect her to forgive you easily." Thomas nodded, his expression growing somber. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm just hoping for the chance to listen. Sometimes we don't remember the things we've done, but others never forget." And Thomas Grayson, on that rainy night, began to understand not all wounds are caused by cruelty. Sometimes it's simply because we were too busy chasing success to notice who was quietly falling apart behind us. The rain hadn't stopped when Thomas made his way to the address Leo had scribbled on a napkin. An old apartment complex tucked deep in the outskirts of town, a place he had never once set foot in during his 20 years of running the culinary empire that bore his name. Peeling paint on the walls, silent hallways, and the musty scent of damp air filled the space. Each step echoed like the building itself was whispering, "You're too late." In front of the faded door marked 2B, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn around, to believe life had moved too far, too long past. But then he remembered Leo's eyes, not eyes that pleaded, but the eyes of someone guarding the truth. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened. Jacob, Leo's real name, stood there, his face still guarded. "You actually came." "I promised," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. The apartment was modest but tidy. An old flower pot sat on the windowsill, family photos carefully framed on the wall, a small world, quietly holding itself together, one Thomas had never known existed. Angela sat on the sofa, the light from an old TV flickering across a face weathered by time, her once fiery hair now streaked with grey. But those eyes, they hadn't changed, sharp, steady, and deep, like they always knew exactly who stood before them and why. "Thomas Grayson," she said, not surprised, not emotional, just a statement of fact. He stepped forward. Uncertain, "I don't know where to begin." Angela set the remote down, folded her arms, and didn't take her eyes off him. "Then, let me help you. Start by answering this. Do you remember ever destroying someone's career?" Thomas felt the air in the room grow thick. He swallowed hard, then sat down in the chair across from her, the space between them like a deep canyon carved by years of silence. "Angela, I truly didn't know what happened after you left. I thought you chose to leave because you wanted something different. I didn't choose to leave." Angela replied, her voice steady, never rising. "I chose to survive." Silence. Thomas understood this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but he hadn't come for easy. He had come to listen. Some doors, when they close, make no sound. But behind them, an entire world might be screaming in lonely silence. And that night, Thomas stepped into the very world he had once unknowingly shattered, not to save it, but to take responsibility. He sat there, face to face with the woman he had once labeled a talented kitchen assistant, now a quiet, powerful presence. No apron, no familiar scent of smoke and spices. But Angela still held the gaze of someone who had once stood between boiling pots and made split-second decisions that shaped an entire menu. "I don't remember ever destroying your life, Angela," Thomas began, hesitantly. "But if that's truly what happened, I need to hear it from you, from your own words." Angela leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Her voice no longer sounded like blame, more like a testimony she had rehearsed in her mind for years. "Do you remember the first mushroom risotto, the one the press said redefined modern Italian cuisine at Grayson's table?" Thomas nodded. "That recipe was mine." Thomas stayed silent. "I developed it after 3 months of testing. I believed that if you saw its potential, you'd help me refine it and put it on the menu with my name under it. You agreed." Thomas bit his lip. The blurry memories were starting to come into focus. But then, the menu only had your name. In the interview, it was just you. The press called it Grayson's signature, and I stood quietly in the back, chopping onions, telling myself, "This is how the industry works." Angela paused and looked at him. "I didn't leave right away. I tried. I thought maybe you just didn't notice. But when I asked to be acknowledged, you smiled and said, 'We're a team, right?'" Thomas lowered his head. That phrase at the time had felt like encouragement to him. But to Angela, it had been a lock, sealing away all her unseen efforts. After I left, I sent my resume to nearly 20 major restaurants in the city, not a single reply. A chef, someone who used to be my friend, told me straight. They said you're difficult to work with and that you caused trouble at Grayson's table. Thomas looked up, his face pale. I never made a call. I didn't tell anyone anything. Angela looked at him, a faint, bitter smile forming on her lips. You didn't have to. In this industry, all it takes is for one person in power to stay silent, and every door will shut. The room fell into silence. In the distance, rain still pattered against the old tin roof. I had to walk away from my passion. I worked in a school cafeteria, then at a small diner. Then I had kids. And after that, life slowly became about bills, discount groceries, and dreams no one ever asked me about again. Angela's voice tightened, but her eyes never wavered. Thomas clenched his hands, bowed his head. Angela, I'm sorry. I never thought I could cause something like that. I believe you, Angela said slowly, that you didn't mean to. But you were too busy being the boss, and I was too busy trying to survive. Not every person who causes harm is cruel, but forgetting can be just as brutal as denial. And Angela, the woman who once poured her soul into the kitchen at Grayson's, had to learn how to stand on her own again, in the silence of the very man who once told her she was part of the team. Thomas sat motionless, as if every word Angela spoke had worn down the confident shell he'd always worn. He who once stood on stage accepting the Culinary Entrepreneur of the Year award was now just a middle-aged man, facing the long overdue consequences of a decade's worth of neglect. He looked up, eyes meeting Angela's, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't know. I truly didn't know it had gotten that serious. I just thought, you left because you didn't want to stay. Angela let out a laugh, but it wasn't relief. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who had explained too many times before, only to be met with people who never had the patience to truly listen. We can come up with 1,000 reasons to justify someone's disappearance, Thomas, but no one walks away from their passion at the height of it, unless they've been extinguished. Thomas placed a hand over his chest, as if trying to keep his heart from breaking. You're right, I was blind. I was too busy chasing spotlights, articles, interviews. I thought if the restaurant succeeded, everyone who helped build it would shine too. But in the end, I left the one who truly deserved it in the dark. Angela said nothing, but there was something in Thomas's words that softened her gaze, not forgiveness, but the quiet recognition of someone who had finally stopped to listen. I don't need you to erase the past, Thomas, she said. No one can do that. But if you truly want to make things right, don't just come here to say, I'm sorry. Do something you've never done before. Bring me back. Thomas nodded, his eyes glimmering with a mix of regret and hope. Angela, if you're willing, I want to invite you back to Grayson's table. Not as a kitchen assistant or a collaborator, as co-executive chef with me. To lead together, be recognized together, and make every decision side by side. Angela looked at him for a long moment. A trace of tears flickered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I don't need a title to buy back my dignity. No, this isn't about buying redemption with a job title. It's an invitation to rebuild what we were supposed to build together." Thomas said, no longer a boss, but someone finally ready to walk beside her. Sometimes an apology isn't the beginning. It's the middle between someone who once overlooked and someone who once endured. And if both are willing to move forward, that is the true end of loneliness. Angela sat in silence. The air in the room felt thick after Thomas's offer. She looked at him for a long time, not to measure his sincerity, but to ask herself, do I still believe in dreams that once shattered? You think one job title will make me forget everything she asked, not harshly, but with a voice full of hurt. I don't think anything can make you forget, Thomas replied, his voice low. I only hope we can begin again from the place we never should have parted. Angela stood and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. Streetlights glowed through the foggy glass, casting a dull yellow streak across the floor. She stood there, like someone listening for the echo of who she used to be when she still wore a chef's coat, when she still believed in the future. I once dreamed of having my name printed on the menu, she said softly, not for fame, just to prove to myself that I was worth it. Thomas nodded. I know. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a draft of a proposal he had written through the sleepless hours of the previous night. I prepared this before I came, Thomas said. A co-executive chef position, full creative control. And not just that. He handed Angela the sheet of paper. At the top, beneath the header, Grayson's Table, New Era Menu. Bold letters read, Featured dish wild mushroom risotto, created by Chef Angela Warren. Angela froze. Her hands trembled as she held the page. I've already sent this to our PR department. The press will know, the guests will know, and the world will know. That dish isn't just a recipe. It's the expression of a heart that was once left behind. She didn't say a word. She slowly sat back down, the paper resting on her lap as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, Thomas said gently. I came because I want to walk this path with you. If you still want to cook. Angela looked at him, and for the first time in their entire conversation, her gaze softened, not icy or guarded, but holding something delicate and quietly blooming, like a seedling breaking through after a long, cold winter. I'll think about it, she said, then paused. Not for you, but for me. Because I need to know if I can still stand in that kitchen, not as someone's shadow, but as myself. Thomas smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. And if you say yes, then this time your name will never be forgotten. Forgiveness doesn't begin by erasing the past. It begins with the chance to write the next chapter, this time with truth. And as Angela held that paper in her hands, she wasn't just holding an offer. She was holding the key to a door she had once been pushed out of. 1 week after that conversation, Angela Warren walked through the front doors of Grayson's table, not in the server's blouse she used to wear, not with the posture of someone applying for a job, but in a crisp white chef's coat, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes steady with resolve. Thomas had instructed the management no welcome party, no all-staff meeting. He understood Angela didn't need applause. She needed space to return on her own terms. As Angela stepped past the glass wall that overlooked the open kitchen, a few young staff members looked up. Some had heard her name mentioned by Thomas. Some didn't know who she was at all. But all of them could sense one thing: this woman wasn't just the new hire. Thomas greeted her at the kitchen entrance, not with a formal introduction, but with a look of sincerity. "Thank you for coming. I haven't agreed to stay long," Angela replied, though her voice had lost its sharp edge. "I came to remember who I used to be." The first few days passed in quiet, but never in silence. Angela started like any other chef, prepping ingredients, checking spices, tasting broths, but every move she made carried a calmness and precision that felt unusual. She didn't bark orders, she offered suggestions, and slowly, every gaze in the kitchen began to turn toward her, as if she were a compass pointing north. One evening, Thomas tasted the vegetable soup she had made, substituting fresh ginger for garlic, and was taken aback. "Why ginger?" Thomas asked. Angela smiled a rare smile. "Because it doesn't overpower the sweetness. It wakes it up." Thomas nodded, and he understood not just about the soup, but that Angela's return was awakening something deeper in this restaurant, something it had long forgotten. Still, not everything went smoothly. Some questioned it. Why suddenly make her co-executive chef? Who even is she? Where's her resume? Thomas said nothing. He simply handed over the magazine interview that had run that week, where he openly admitted to his past mistakes and introduced Angela as one of the original creative minds behind Grayson's table. One evening, Angela stepped out of the kitchen and saw her two sons sitting at a small table by the window, the same table she once served in her early days. Leo winked, and Max waved. "Is there anything on the menu from Mum tonight?" Max asked. Angela nodded, her eyes glowing with a pride she hadn't dared to show in years. She didn't need applause. She didn't need medals. All she needed was for the people she loved to know that she was still standing. In the kitchen that was once her dream, once her wound, and now, slowly, her second chance. She didn't come back to prove anything to the world. She came back to face herself, to see if she could forgive the version of her that once walked away. And in that kitchen, amid the smoke, the sound of knives on chopping boards, and the bubbling of boiling pots, Angela wasn't just cooking, she was healing. The kitchen at Grayson's table wasn't the same anymore, not because of some dramatic renovation, but because the energy inside it had shifted. Angela wasn't trying to be the boss. She didn't need to fight for her voice to be heard. She simply stood among the pots and pans, and with her hands rewrote a story that had never been told completely. She didn't need her name on every menu, but her flavors carried it. Depth, memory, and a faint heat from the years she had endured. And each guest, though they may not have known the story behind it, could taste something different. A richness they'd never felt before. A something they couldn't name, but they knew it had been missing. Until now. Thomas, once the boss, had now stepped back, more a companion than a commander. He still tasted dishes, still gave feedback, but for the first time, he truly listened. Every morning, they reviewed orders together, redesigned seasonal desserts, shared ideas over steaming mugs of coffee. Once, Angela even scolded him for chopping onions too slowly, and both burst into laughter, like two rookies starting all over again. But beyond the kitchen hours, something deeper was being restored. Angela began rewriting her recipe notebook, not just to share, but to preserve. She taught the young sous chefs little tricks that seemed trivial: how to feel the oven's heat with the palm of your hand, or how to listen to the sound of oil to know when to drop the fish in. These were things she had once learned alone, and now she was passing them on. Saturday nights. Leo and Max returned. They sat at their usual spot by the window, waiting for their mum's shift to end. One evening, Thomas brought them a new tiramisu he'd been working on and sat beside them. "You know," he said, "your mum is one of the best chefs I've ever known." Leo looked at him, his eyes no longer as guarded as before. "We know, but back then, we thought you were the one who hurt her." Thomas nodded. "And back then, I never even considered I might be wrong. But you two, you helped me see." Max hesitated, then asked softly, "Did our mum really forgive you?" Thomas looked at the two boys, his voice slow and steady. "I don't think that's what matters most. What matters is that I'm not running anymore. And your mum chose to rise again, not for me, but for herself." Right then, the kitchen door swung open. Angela stepped out, her chef's coat draped over one shoulder, her face tired but glowing. She looked at the three of them, her two sons, and the man who had once been just a shadow behind her, and nodded. No words were needed. Everything was clear. Healing doesn't come from an apology. It comes from the courage to face what once broke you. Angela didn't need validation anymore, because this time she and the people who mattered most could finally see her worth more clearly than ever before. Late one evening, the restaurant was winding down. The lights had dimmed, the clatter of pots and pans had softened, and the kitchen was being cleaned as usual. But in a familiar corner, right beside the spice rack, Angela still stood, ladle in hand, gently stirring a simmering pot of tomato sauce. Thomas stepped in, quietly watching her from a distance. She didn't turn around, but somehow she knew he was there. "You added salt to the pasta water again today," she said softly. "It tasted a bit flat," he replied. "You still did it wrong. That kind of pasta needs the salt added after the water boils." Angela set the ladle down, then turned to face him. But this time, her gaze wasn't sharp with betrayal. It was the look of someone finally tired of building walls. Thomas chuckled, a quiet, unguarded laugh. "I've learned more from you than from anyone I've ever worked with. Even the things I wasn't wise enough to appreciate back then." Angela sat down on the wooden bench by the wall. Thomas sat beside her, not too close, not too far. The space between them now was close enough that they were no longer strangers. "I used to think," Angela said slowly, "that if I ever came back to this kitchen, it would be to reclaim justice. But now I realize I just needed to be myself, not someone else's shadow." Thomas nodded, thoughtful. "And you've done that. Without anyone raising a banner, you've become the soul of this place." Angela looked over at him, her eyes tinged with sadness. "Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It happens each day I choose to step back into the kitchen. Every dish I cook is another chance I give myself to believe that people can change." Then she held out her hand, not a handshake between colleagues, but a gesture that said, "I'm willing to let go of the past if you're ready to walk forward differently." Thomas took her hand, warm, steady, and real. Neither of them said another word. But in that moment, no contract was needed to confirm their roles as co-executive chefs, because they had just sealed something greater, a shared path forward, where no one would stand behind the other, but side by side. Some acts of forgiveness are never spoken aloud, because they live in every movement, in every dish cooked, every evening spent in the kitchen, and in each moment where one dares to look into the eyes of the person who once hurt them and chooses not to turn away. Angela never had to declare she had forgiven him, because the path she chose, staying, cooking again, passing down her passion, and reaching for Thomas's hand was the answer. Thomas Grayson sat alone in his office on the second floor of Grayson's table. Below, the restaurant buzzed with its usual weekend rhythm, but to him, all the noise passed through a pane of invisible glass, still, very still. On the desk lay a fresh copy of that morning's paper, the headline bold across the top, "The woman behind the legendary recipes. Angela Warren returns to Grayson's table." Beneath it, a photo of Angela in the kitchen, ladle in hand, eyes focused. Not the look of a celebrity, but the look of someone who had finally been handed back what once was taken, recognition. Thomas reread a quote of his from the article. "I spent years building a culinary empire that carried my name, but it took one fateful meeting to realize titles aren't the greatest achievement. The real triumph is having the courage to face your mistakes and make them right." He folded the newspaper and leaned back in his chair. On the shelf were trophies, certificates, medals, but his eyes landed on something else. A newly framed photo, him and Angela standing side by side in the kitchen, co-executive chefs, smiling, not posed, not forced. A real smile. Thomas once believed humility was something for beginners, but now he understood humility isn't about knowing less, it's about listening more. It's about bowing your head, not out of weakness, but because you're strong enough to admit you were wrong. It's about sharing the spotlight, not because you shine less, but because others deserve to shine too. And it's about pausing, not to give up, but to see who's still walking beside you. Success doesn't truly belong to you if you build it by staying silent in the face of someone else's pain. But if you dare to return, speak, and listen, then sometimes the very place where you once hurt someone can become the place where you are reborn with a new heart. That evening, the restaurant had quieted early. Leo and Max sat at their usual table near the kitchen door, the same spot where they once whispered plans to expose the man who ruined their mother's life. And now, in that very place, they were being served a dessert their mother had created herself, caramel apple tart with sea salt, paired with roasted hazelnut vanilla ice cream. Thomas approached, a towel over his shoulder and a mug of hot cocoa in hand. "May I offer two very special guests the house favorite from our autumn menu?" Max smiled, no longer avoiding eye contact like he had the first time they met. Leo looked up, his gaze calmer now, still carrying the quiet maturity of a child who had seen his mother endure too much, too soon. "Mum doesn't fake her smile anymore," Max said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Now, she smiles for real." Thomas sat beside them, his eyes softening. "That's because of you two," Thomas said. "Because you were brave enough to ask the hard questions, brave enough to go looking for the truth." Leo rested his chin on his hand, thoughtful. "I used to think grown-ups never admitted they were wrong, especially successful ones." Thomas nodded, offering no defense. "Most of the time, that's true. But sometimes, it takes losing what truly matters to realize the truth. I once believed I built an empire. But the truth is, if there's no one actually lighting the fire in that kitchen, then all you've got is a cold building." Max chuckled. "So it's like Mom's the head chef, and you're the guy who brings the firewood." All three of them laughed. The tension eased, replaced by warmth. In that moment, they were no longer the owner, the victim's sons, the man who made mistakes. They were simply three people stepping out of an old chapter and looking toward a new one where no one needed to prove they'd won. As they got ready to leave, Leo turned to Thomas. "I'm not sure everything will always be okay, but if Mum's happy now, I think you did something right." Thomas lowered his head, eyes suddenly glassy. "Thank you. I never expected forgiveness. But sitting here with you two tonight, I feel like I've been trusted again, even just a little, and that means more than any award I've ever received. Not every child needs a hero. Sometimes they just need an adult brave enough to say, 'I was wrong, but I'm learning.'" And for Leo and Max, their mother's return wasn't just a miracle. It was proof that if we don't give up, then the past can become a launching pad, not a life sentence. Late at night, Grayson's table had closed its doors. Outside, the yellow streetlights rippled across rain-slick pavement. Inside the kitchen, only two people remained, Thomas and Angela standing side by side, quietly washing the last ladles of the day. No more orders being called, no more sizzling pans, just the sound of running water, gentle breaths, and silences that finally felt peaceful. Thomas wiped his hands on a white towel, then turned to Angela. "Do you remember your first day in this kitchen?" Angela nodded. "I burned the first pasta I ever made. And you said, 'It's okay, as long as you don't burn down the whole restaurant.'" They both laughed, a laugh that didn't hide anything, a laugh that wasn't forced. Then Thomas spoke softer now, and more honest than any speech he had ever given. "I once let this restaurant become a place that caused someone pain. But now, I want to make it a place where people heal." Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she placed her hand on the counter and looked him in the eyes. "And this time, you won't be doing it alone." In that moment, Grayson's table was no longer the empire of a successful man. It had become something far more powerful, a living reminder of one simple, enduring truth, that while the truth can be buried, with enough courage, it can always be unearthed, cleaned off, and placed right where it belongs. 1 week later, a second article was published in Cuisine Today. Angela Warren and Thomas Grayson, two chefs, one past, one future. The photo of them standing behind the kitchen counter with two children in the foreground, tasting dessert, became a symbol, not just for the culinary world, but for anyone who's ever been hurt, ever lost something, and ever dared to begin again. If you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken, if you've ever turned away when you should have held someone's hand, if you've ever thought it was too late to apologize, to make it right, to come back, then remember this: not everyone will give you a second chance. But if life does, don't let it slip away like a dish gone cold on the table. Serve it again, this time with your whole heart.